I'm about to marry my long-time crush and fiancé, but I'm willing to jump out a window if it means escaping the wedding. Why? Because I've been reborn. In my previous life, we were married for over 20 years, and we were the couple everyone admired. But the good times stopped abruptly on our 25th wedding anniversary. She took her own life, choosing to die with her true love. Standing before her tombstone, I murmured, "Do you regret marrying me?" I knew I'd hear no response and answered my own question. "I regret marrying you." When I woke up again, it was right before our wedding. I decided to run away this time. Let's just become strangers who used to know each other well. Unexpectedly, she found me as if on death's door and said, "I never regretted marrying you, not in this life or the last. You were always the one I wanted." When I opened my eyes, someone tapped my shoulder. In a daze, I saw the door open, and there was Becky, who'd been gone for 10 years, wearing a wedding dress. She looked like an angel from heaven under the lights. The audience was stunned into silence, everyone admiring the bride's beauty. Meanwhile, I was sweating bullets. Someone nudged me to go towards the stage, a step I had requested in the first place. But now, I just locked eyes with Becky from afar. She smiled, and I turned my head and ran. The wedding was off. No way I was marrying her. Chaos erupted immediately. The hotel was sprawling. I couldn't quickly find the right exit. Becky's family and friends rushed after me. My would-be father-in-law glared displeased. "Eric, the wedding's begun. Stop messing around and go finish the ceremony." I shook my head firmly. I couldn't believe it, but I'd somehow been reborn, right on my own wedding day with Becky. Clearly, this second chance was a sign. I refused to go down that road again. Relatives pleaded, "Whatever's bothering you, just get through the wedding first. Becky's waiting for you." What? Becky's waiting for me? Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a white figure chasing me, like a speeding arrow. No more hesitation. I pushed open a window and leaped out from the 3rd floor. Thankfully, an awning broke my fall. Even though I felt the sharp pain upon getting up, it was nothing compared to the heartache Becky caused me over 2 decades. Leaning on my side, I limped away. Horrified, people peeked out at me. "Eric, you've lost it. You really ran out on your wedding." Becky was among them, looking both anxious and worried. "Eric, what are you doing? What about our wedding?" In my previous life, I'd never have done something so reckless. But now, Becky, marrying you was the biggest mistake I've ever made. I'm fixing that mistake. Remember, I'm the one calling this off. I didn't wait to see Becky's reaction. I hailed a cab and took off. I knew better than anyone that the white wedding dress wasn't for me. She was never really aiming to marry me. The memories swirled in my mind, remembering when I arrived at the police station. They asked, "Do you know anything about this guy, Stephen, who died with your wife Becky?" I was so lost and helpless then. For over 2 decades, I never truly saw her for who she was. This life, I wouldn't repeat the past. To get away, I used the excuse of my fall and ended up in the hospital. My phone was blowing up with calls, either nosy or angry. The text said, "Enough. Eric, how could you do this to Becky? She's passed out crying. Get over here and make amends." I didn't care. Becky wouldn't be upset about me leaving. She'd be relieved, really. Now she and Stephen could finally be together. They owed me thanks. In my daydream, the door to my hospital room swung open, revealing my furious parents. "Eric, you've got some nerve. First, skipping out on your wedding and now jumping out windows? What's wrong with you?" I didn't expect them so soon. I almost dove under the blankets, begging for mercy. "Don't scold me. I'm already in the hospital." I woefully showed them my bandaged arm, hoping to stir some parental sympathy. They just gave a cold snort. "Serves you right. Becky's in the hospital too, and you need to take responsibility. That's why they came so fast." Becky's acting was pretty top-notch, just so nobody guessed she didn't want the wedding either. Then my folks laid down the law. "Once you're out of the hospital, you're rescheduling the wedding with Becky." "No," I said forcefully, causing a moment of confusion. Our marriage was something I'd basically pushed for. I fell for Becky in high school after transferring, crushing on her for 5 years. When her family hit financial troubles, they came to my parents with a proposal for an alliance. I was thrilled back then and went through great lengths to get my parents on board. But now things had changed, and they couldn't accept it. Why? Asked a feminine voice suddenly. My parents stepped aside to reveal Becky herself, out of her wedding dress and in a hospital gown. The sight of her frail figure tugged at my heart a little, fleeting pangs of pity and sorrow. She fixed her gaze on me and asked again, "Why won't you marry me?" I frowned, still looking tough. "Because I don't love you anymore." When Becky heard my answer, it was like all the strength left her body, and she collapsed, actually fainting. My parents gave me a hard glare and quickly followed the nurse to get Becky back to her room. For a moment I thought about going along too, but I held back. I couldn't get it. When did Becky's health get so weak? Was she pretending? After that, my parents were mad and didn't come by to see me again. A friend stopped by to check on me, giving me a thumbs up. "You're something else, making Becky pass out like that. Weren't you super into her before? Chasing her forever? You were almost married, so why'd you quit?" I waved it off. "Too easy. Didn't want to chase her anymore. Now you chase me." I looked up, and there was Becky at the hospital door, smiling at me. "I don't want to see you," I said flatly, giving her the boot. She wasn't bothered, just walked in with a thermos and started pouring soup. "I made some bone soup for you, have it hot while it's good." My friend noticed things were getting weird and bolted. So, it was just me facing off with Becky. I stayed stone-faced. Becky came over with the bowl, coaxing me like a kid. "Smell it? It's so good." The familiar scent hit me. In a past life, Becky and I were married for over 20 years, the model couple in everyone's eyes. I kind of thought the same. She planned everything perfectly, except she was often MIA on holidays and anniversaries due to work, though she always apologized and got gifts, exactly what I'd like or had mentioned. Becky, who never used to cook, had actually learned to make meals. She'd cook whenever she was home. She felt bad about my stomach, so she learned to make different soups, and this bone soup was my favorite. I once thought it showed she cared, but then learned the truth. That thought made the soup lose its appeal. I turned away. "I don't want it. I don't want to see you. Just leave." Becky bit her lip, trembling all over, and after a long pause, forced a weak smile. "You don't feel like it now, so I'll just leave it. Remember to have some when you're hungry." I didn't want to hear her, so I hid under the covers. She didn't leave for a while, and I heard the faint rustling outside. Finally, the door closed, and I peeked out. Becky had tidied the room and left a bouquet of fresh flowers where I would see it right off. I didn't care. She's quite an actress. For the next few days, Becky showed up 3 times a day, bringing carefully made meals each time. I never touched them, though. I ignored her. She just decorated the room, making it homey like before, even resembling our past life's room, which made me uncomfortable. The moment Becky was gone, I checked out of the hospital. "I'm going home." Turned out I was too optimistic. I had barely reached home when Becky showed up too. She was busy massaging my parents' backs. "If your shoulders bother you, uncle, auntie, I'm always here to help." My parents saw me coming downstairs and called out, "You just got out of the hospital, Eric. Let her give you a massage first." Becky looked at me expectantly. It was clear my parents sold me out. I understood why they were pleased with Becky. Before knowing the real Becky, I was fooled by her kind, gentle nature too. But what was Becky after? Then it hit me. Her family's company had a funding issue and wanted to marry into money. Becky was afraid my family wouldn't help. She needn't worry. Her family did well after the rough patch last time. It was a smart investment. Seeing it that way, I viewed Becky as a potential business deal and softened my tone. My parents noticed my shift and nudged Becky toward me. She lost balance and fell against me like a leaf. I instinctively caught her and realized how shockingly thin she'd become, fragile like she might break if I squeezed too hard. I frowned. Her eyes met mine, red with embarrassment and joy. I was annoyed and pushed her away a bit roughly. Becky staggered but stayed happy, and my parents gave me knowing looks, as if my resistance was just me playing hard to get. I had to get out. "I have plans, won't be home tonight." I grabbed my phone and headed out. Becky, relentless, jogged after me. I headed to the car, and she reached for the passenger door. Annoyed, I said, "Stop. Can you just stop bugging me?" My voice was loud. Becky looked startled, frozen, shoulders shaking. Her weak appearance made me even more irritated. "I know you're here for the money. Don't worry. I'll invest even if we don't get married. Happy now? Then leave." She didn't react, so I sped off. In the bar's private booth, acquaintances were talking about my exploits. "Eric, you're insane. You threw away the campus queen after winning her over and dodged the wedding." I knew it. Eric isn't a simp. The whole act was to reel Becky in. Becky's reputation's shot now. Serves her right. She was always so stuck up, looking down on us who like to party. Now she's the one getting played. Hearing the mockery, I realized my escape had made Becky a joke in our circle. Once the darling of the school, now anyone can step on her shine. But I didn't want to get into their gossip. I just drank my drink. In the morning, I stumbled back home, wobbly on my feet. My mom and dad were sitting on the couch, looking pretty pissed. "You're getting more and more out of hand, drinking all night. Becky was such a good girl, and you decided to dump her just like that. At first, you were the one who wanted to marry her. You better give us a reason today." Hearing them brought me halfway out of my drunken state. Yeah, I pushed for it back then. Lived in pain long enough to realize forced things aren't sweet. I remembered the day I got the news about Becky's death. It was our 25th wedding anniversary. Just the day before, I'd actually stood up to Becky for once. Not for much, just to get her to come back for our anniversary. Because that day was also the 30th anniversary of when I first liked her. "If you don't come back, let's just get divorced." That's what I said. But to Becky, threats like that must have been nothing but a joke. That night, as I waited in the restaurant for her, I got the news that Becky had died. After hanging up, I dashed madly to the police station. "Are you Becky's husband?" Once the cops confirmed my identity, they looked at me with eyes full of sympathy. They told me Becky had committed suicide with another man named Steven, possibly a lover's suicide. "Do you know anything about this Steven?" That unfamiliar name was something I'd never even heard of. I shook my head aimlessly. I found out who Steven was at Becky's funeral. Her best friend was sobbing uncontrollably in front of her body. "If I'd known you loved Steven, I'd have stopped you from marrying Eric any way I could." That's when I learned Steven was Becky's college senior. They never lost touch over the years. Every holiday Becky missed was spent with Steven. At the end of the funeral, I was the only one left. I mumbled to Becky's gravestone, "Becky, do you regret marrying me?" The stone remained silent, but I knew the answer. I regretted marrying her too. If I had another chance, I'd never have gotten involved with her. With that thought, my mind cleared up, and I looked determinedly at my parents. I can't get married to her. I can't explain why, but I will help her family. My mom sighed heavily. "You'll regret it. But fine, we won't bother with you anymore. Do whatever you want." I went back to bed and slept like a rock. Once I was refreshed, I texted Becky to meet me at the office. Becky showed up quickly, looking all done up. Her hair was styled in waves, and she wore a white dress, like she was going on a date. "Eric, it's been so long since you asked me out." She had this shy, cute look on her face like a teenage girl. I tossed a contract on the table and spoke in a businesslike tone. "I know your family needs 60 million. Sign this contract and I'll give you what you want. But after that, don't ever contact me again." Becky stayed quiet, looking down. I urged her, "Come on. I'm giving you what you want, so don't be greedy." Hearing this, Becky looked up, her eyes full of tears. She threw the contract back at me, rushed over, and held onto my shirt, making me meet her gaze. "Eric, I didn't want an investment. I wanted you from the start. Haven't I been clear enough?" Tears rolled down her face, and she hit me on the chest with her fist, though it didn't hurt a bit. "We've been married for over 20 years. You're reborn now and bullying your wife this way. You weren't like this in the past life." My brows furrowed even tighter. I had no idea Becky had been reborn too. No wonder. I'd felt something off about her all along this life. She learned to cook only after we got married. Since she was also reborn, it was better to lay everything out and be clear. My face turned cold as ice. Don't mention the past life. You know what you did back then. Since you're reborn too, let's go our separate ways. I won't stop you from finding true love, and don't use investments as an excuse to bother me. That's not true what you said at the gravestone. Before she could finish, the security I'd called took her away. With everything settled, I hopped on a plane abroad the next day, saying it was for a project survey, but it was actually for fun. In my previous life, I gave up too much for Becky. I knew she was busy, so I'd accommodate her schedule. That meant hardly going on trips or hanging out with friends, just to see her the moment she got back. Even on holidays, when she couldn't come back, I'd make excuses for her. It's because everyone else is off work, so she should work harder, I'd tell myself, so she could always be one step ahead for the company's success. That was her dream. I fooled myself like that for over 20 years, living in the illusion of love Becky built for me. When I woke up from this dream, I realized how pathetic I was. Why waste precious time on one woman? But even as I tried to avoid any news about Becky, some idiots would share it in the group, hoping to see her become a joke. Monday. Becky's really fake, showing off every day. Eric doesn't even want her anymore. He's abroad now. She's actually going after his parents. How shameless can she get? Tuesday. Becky joined Eric's parents for a banquet. Is she really playing daughter-in-law now or just fooling them? Wednesday. Becky was at Eric's usual club. Was she there to look for him or to find a new man? Thursday. Becky was running around like a headless chicken looking for any trace of Eric, but nobody wanted to tell her anything. Serves her right. It's been 2 days without any news. When the gossip finally reported back about Becky, turns out she got admitted to the hospital again. No one in the group even tried to sympathize. Here we go again. Becky's back in the hospital once more. Is she just acting? Trying to make our Eric feel sorry for her and come looking for her? She's really scheming. I stared at the messages that quickly filled up the chat, and I went silent. Since Becky also got a second chance, why isn't she busy fixing regrets from her past life and having a romance that ends happily ever after with Steven? Why is she keeping tabs on me? The first chunk of money already hit her family's account. Does Becky not care for the money, wanting even more? In the past life, after we got married, my family's wealth was as good as hers. I basically handed everything to her. That amount was way more than just a mere 60 million. If Becky came back to this life, her hunger for wealth would only be greater now. As for this hospital gig, I know her health well enough. Unless she decides to ruin herself, she's living till her 60s or 70s, no problem. She's just putting on a show now. I took off to Europe for a month, wild and free. But my mom kept hounding me, so eventually, I had to crawl back to the country. But I wasn't expecting to run into someone I didn't want to see as soon as I stepped off the plane. I clicked my tongue in annoyance. But Becky had a smile pasted on her face, trying to be pleasant. Eric, I came to pick you up and take you home. I turned around and walked fast with my suitcase. Before long, Becky faded into the background, out of sight. I was about to hop in a ride myself, but since my mom sent her, going back alone would just earn me a scolding. So, I grudgingly waited for Becky at the entrance. But I ended up seeing Becky and another guy walk out instead. And that guy was Becky's crush, Steven. They walked, pushing and pulling at each other. I watched the scene unfold in front of me, my eyes turning dark and unreadable. Never saw this in the past life, but I'm getting an eyeful this time around. I should have seen it coming. How come I didn't learn my lesson? I let out a cold laugh, got into the car. When I got back to the neighborhood, I saw my mom waiting at the door from a mile away. But she quickly wore a sour look seeing I was by myself. Why are you back alone? Where's Becky? She's a girl, and you left her stranded at the airport and came back on your own. How did I raise such an inconsiderate son? The girls made so many concessions. What did she do that's so unforgivable to make you act this way? If your father and I knew how Becky treated me in a past life, they'd regret trying to pair us up so eagerly right now. But you can't really spill the beans about what happened then. Good thing there's a solid excuse now. I couldn't hide it anymore. Becky came to pick me up with her crush. She likes her college senior. You want your son to chase after her and get his feelings stomped on? Am I really your son or not? The news stunned my mom. That can't be right. Becky wouldn't like someone else. She told me herself, which is why. She mumbled to herself for a while, thinking about how I was acting, and no matter how much she liked Becky, she had to believe me. After all, I was her son. She knew my character. If I bullied a girl out of nowhere, I must be possessed. After realizing it, my mom sheepishly smiled. Oh, son, I had no idea she was that kind of person. My bad. Come, let's go home. You've been out of the country for so long. You haven't had a proper meal at home. I'm cooking tonight. That night, I finally felt a mother's love I hadn't felt in a while. And the good news? After realizing Becky's true nature, my mom slammed the door across her at the gates, not even letting her inside the neighborhood. But Becky wasn't giving up and would stake out spots where I hung out with my friends. My buddies even admired her persistence. Becky showed up again today. She looks frail, but her endurance game is strong. Go up against her and you'll definitely lose. Get out and have some fun? Or don't you get bored cooped up at home? Of course, it's boring. I felt like I was growing moss at home, so I planned to schedule the meetup at a club. Becky's a bit of a neat freak. She's never stepping foot there. It was all loud music and dancing, hips shaking. That whole scene was buzzing. Until this out-of-place figure walked in and killed the vibe. Becky seemed like a lingering spirit, a disaster I couldn't seem to avoid. Her frail form cut through the crowd and came up to me. Those delicate hands of hers grabbed mine, trying to pull me away. But Becky was too weak. I remained unbudged. She stubbornly looked up, her words laced with pleading. Eric, give me a chance to explain. Please? After you hear me out, if you still can't take it, I'll disappear from your life. Just give me another shot, okay? Tears welled up in her eyes. In a previous life, I'd never seen her cry once. I thought she was either tough or just downright cold-hearted. But here she was, shedding tears twice right in front of me. Like she was finally willing to show me all her vulnerabilities. That's all I ever wanted back then. I didn't want her to carry it all alone. She could lean on me a little. I am your husband, after all. The Becky in front of me overlapped with the fond memories of past Becky. I stopped resisting and let her lead me away from the crowd. This is your last chance, Becky. We found a spot where no one was around. For a long time, Becky kept crying, her body shaking, speaking in broken sentences. I used the last shred of patience I had while she gathered herself. After a bit more, Becky calmed down some. She looked at me with sad eyes and finally spoke up. Eric, actually, after I died in the previous life, my soul stayed with you. I heard your words by the tombstone. My mind went blank. Rebirth was already unbelievable, but hearing Becky's soul lingering after death left me stunned. How could this be? What I didn't expect was that what Becky said next shocked me even more. In my past life, a conqueror from another world took over my body. Her goal was to capture Stephen. But her progress wasn't great, and my consciousness was too strong, so her control over my body wasn't complete. Every time I woke up, I just wanted to go home and see you one more time. I battled with her for over 20 years. Watching her fail, I knew I could return to you. She chose to die with Stephen in the end. It was only after my body died that I could be with you forever. In places where you couldn't see, I was always there with you every day. I saw your pain, and it hurt me too. I know Becky let you down, but I swear it wasn't me who hurt you. The real Becky would only love Eric for a lifetime. What Becky said left me unable to calm down for a long time. It was just too bizarre. What system, what conqueror? Then why were we both reborn? It was the system's compensation for what it did to my body. So my rebirth was because of Becky's deal with the system. I stood there, stunned, my heart racing. Emotionally, I accepted her explanation, but rationally, I couldn't see the past Becky as two different people. The wounds I suffered were very real. Becky saw I wasn't ready to forgive her, and she smiled bitterly. Like a farewell, she said to me, "This is the last time we'll meet. I have only one last wish. The question you asked by the tombstone in our past lives. I want to answer you. I never regretted marrying you. In this life and the last, you were the only one I ever wanted to be with." Her voice was filled with endless sadness and reflection. Becky took one last look at me, her eyes tracing my figure like rusty gears slowly turning, trying to leave. Then the gear suddenly flew off the axle, hitting the ground. A dull thud. I looked up only to see Becky fall, unconscious. I thought I'd let go of my feelings for her, but instinctively I rushed to her side. I spoke, my voice choking up. "Becky, what happened? Don't scare me. How can you be sick? In our past life, you were so healthy." No matter how I called, Becky didn't respond. She lay there, seemingly caught in some great pain she couldn't escape. In that moment, I was panicked. I trembled as I held her, almost as if she weighed nothing but a gear. Becky was even thinner than the last time I saw her. Something important seemed to be slipping away. My heart ached faintly. This time, Becky didn't wake after fainting for a long time. After a series of tests at the hospital, the doctor regretfully told me it was late-stage pancreatic cancer. Hearing the diagnosis, I felt like I fell into an ice cave, everything cold and numb. I was probably the person who understood this condition most besides the doctor, because in our past life, I died of it within 3 months after being diagnosed. But how could Becky get this disease? She was always so healthy. For over 20 years, Becky rarely even caught a cold. In this life, she had cancer with not much time left. Is this the price we paid for the system altering our fate? Then why am I okay? On the third day, Becky slowly woke up. I was by her side the entire time, gripping her hand tightly. The moment she moved, I was instantly alert. "Becky, how are you feeling?" I anxiously asked about her condition. But Becky was tearful. "Eric, it's true. You finally forgave me. I thought everything I heard was just a dream." Her face was pale without color, but her eyes were not empty, gazing at me greedily. Such a Becky looked like she might leave me the next second. I held her tightly. "I was too stubborn, pushing you away time and again. This time, I won't do that anymore." I took out all the anger from the fake Becky on the real one. She wasn't at fault. She was a victim too, watching her body act against her will. I believe it pained her more than it did me. Becky leaned against me and seemed to fall asleep again. After a while, she whispered in my ear, "Eric, I want to go home. Please take me home." The doctor told me Becky's condition was declining rapidly. A month would be optimistic, and staying in the hospital would allow for timely adjustments. But Becky didn't want to spend her last moments in the hospital. I took her back to our past life's home. Becky's spirits seemed lifted, and her face a bit more vibrant. But I knew she was just holding on. Late at night, Becky was in terrible pain. Her body curled up, trying to find a position to ease her suffering. But I knew no matter what, the pain deep in her bones wouldn't go away. She couldn't sleep through the night, and I lay by her side, silently weeping, soaking the sheets, pretending to sleep through it all. Seeing my love suffer hurt me deeply, but I understood each of her symptoms intimately, feeling them just as keenly. Yet when the sun rose and light flooded the room, we would act like nothing had happened. Becky would smile and head to the kitchen to make soup for me, but really she directed while I washed and chopped. The best soup tasted by her would all end up in my stomach. "So delicious. I want to drink your soup for a lifetime. Then I'll make it for you forever." But our forever seemed so short. In our past lives, we missed each other. This time around, we managed to clear up misunderstandings, yet still faced the painful prospect of parting. Later, she was in so much pain during the day that she couldn't move. I'd hold her while we sat in the rocking chair in the garden. She'd rest her eyes while I'd recount all the silly things I did when I fell for her at first sight after transferring schools in my senior year. Becky would laugh so hard she'd start coughing. Then she'd mysteriously tell me a secret. I thought Becky was truly carrying a lot of secrets, bearing so much weight, yet standing strong. Luckily, this one seemed light yet somehow heavy. "I actually knew all about the sneaky things you were up to," she said. "That's why I couldn't help falling for you. No one else would be as sincere with me as you." Listening to her, tears rolled down my face. Becky kept talking until she was too tired. She murmured, "Eric, I wish I could marry you again. I love you so much." I struggled to hold back my tears, trying to speak clearly, word by word. "You already are my wife. In this life, I only have you. I love you." A gentle breeze swept through the branches, carrying away the leaves barely hanging on. The leaves fluttered down to the ground. In my arms, Becky closed her eyes and took her last breath. For a long time, I finally cried out loud like a child. Why couldn't Becky and I have a love like everyone else's? I cried for so long that I started seeing things, like a strange light slowly rising from Becky's body, floating into the air. I gently grasped it. A strange mechanical voice echoed in my mind. "Human, let me go. I am a noble system." I couldn't believe it. The system had been with Becky all along. Was her death because of it? I glared fiercely at the light. "Tell me, did you cause Becky's death? Why did you hurt her? Believe me, I can make you disappear." My grip tightened, and surprisingly, it worked. The system screamed, "Injustice! Becky voluntarily traded her health for yours. But her body wasn't the same, so her illness broke out early. Becky did it to save me." I stood stunned for what felt like forever, a consuming pain spreading from my heart to my limbs, one called the agony of losing a loved one. I even considered whether I should just follow Becky. The system spoke again. "You two are something else, truly. One more ruthless than the other. Fine, consider it borrowed time. In the next life, both of you have to work for me." "What are you talking about?" I couldn't make sense of what the system said, ready to question further. But my head grew heavy, and sound and light slipped away from me. One last thought crossed my mind. Am I dying? Can I finally go find Becky? Silence enveloped me. In the darkness, there were noisy, bustling sounds. Light covered my eyes as I woke up back in my senior year. The bell rang, and the teacher brought me into the classroom. "Class, this is a new transfer student. He will be studying with us for the next year. Introduce yourself to everyone." I immediately scanned the room, searching for the figure that occupied my thoughts. Sure enough, Becky sat in the third row, looking just as youthful as I remembered from high school. This was our first meeting. She looked up, smiling at me as if the whole world boiled down to just us two. And my eyes held no one else, just her. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you. If possible, I hope we can be together forever."